So David Hogg has this tweet, which goes in line with what we saw from the crosstabs in the New York Times poll. And he's getting ragged on by a lot of people on the right, but he's right. He says, I hope I'm wrong, but if we lose in November, I think the main reason why will be the number of young men of all races that are no longer Democrats. There's been a taboo about talking about this because we understandably are hesitant to make men a main point of conversation. Given we have been for thousands of years, excellent parentheses there, David, we have a real problem to deal with. At this point, with 60 days to go, there isn't much we can do to recover it other than turning out more young women and trying to slow the departure of young men. I think a lot of this is caused by COVID and the epidemic of male loneliness in this country and the ensuing commodification through social media of misogyny. Long term, we have a lot of work to do to provide positive examples of what actual masculinity looks like that is not defined by putting down women or other people, but by lifting others up and being a true leader. David, I've got news for you. That's called the conservative view of masculinity, the providing heroic father, the man who rolls up his sleeves and runs into a burning building. I dare you, good sir, to make a commercial for Democrats where a chiseled, strong man. How about this? Here's my vision. It starts with a frail, overweight man. So maybe frail and overweight aren't the right way to put it, but a weak, overweight man. And he looks in the mirror and says, we can be better. And he works out and he gets strong. And then he's smiling and he's shaking hands with people of all different racial backgrounds. And then one day on his way home, a burning building, and he runs in and he saves a pair of migrant twin babies. And it says, being a man doesn't mean you have to be Republican, blah, blah, blah. Make that. You know why? They will rip the Democrats to shreds. They will say, why do men have to look that way? Who says you need to exercise? People are healthy. No matter what you do, they will destroy you for this. What does he think Republicans are doing in representing men? Does he think the Republican view of men is that they're all just like the Fonz or like a jock football player picking on nerds? Because the masculine view on the right is strong men protecting the people they care about.
I love this statement because he references the male loneliness epidemic, which I think is real, while also giving an example of why men probably do not want to be Democrats anymore. They're taught to be self-loathing. He says, I'm hesitant to make men the main point of conversation, given we have been for thousands of years. Like, if you
lost
were
everybody
with a party, why would you be like, I hate myself, but you guys should really hang out with us. It's the worst here, but also let's continue to be a part of this.
A burgeoning faction that we're seeing in the Republican Party now is this, I forgot who coined the phrase, but this sort of barstool conservative, who I think David Hogg is kind of hinting towards. You see Donald Trump going on these podcasts with these young influencers, Aiden Ross types and so on. I think that's the type of audience he's talking about, people who he'd call misogynistic but are just, regular young men, in my estimation.
So that gives me a headache. That whole wall of text, that's like, to me, that's like reading libGPT, right? But what stands out to me about that is no mention of your vice presidential candidate, who is a man, who is supposed to be a coach, who served in the military, It seems like an easy thing.
Dude, look, man, for better or for worse, this is why young guys watch Andrew Tate. And the media loses their mind, and Democrats are losing their mind, and the World Economic Forum types are losing their mind. Why is Andrew Tate getting so popular? We got to lock him up. We got to put him away. Well, look, the dude's certainly got a bunch of stupid, nasty things he's been accused of and things he said. That's not my point. I'm not saying I like the guy. That's up to you. The point is, young guys are watching a dude who's ripped, who exercises, who works out, who smokes cigars, who's got a Bugatti, and they're like, I want to be great. And you're not getting it from Tim Walz. Tim Walz is the doofy, I eat beef and cheese tacos with no seasoning. It's disparaging. Dude, Gordon Ramsay is a white guy, okay? And he's like one of the best chefs ever, right? Why do they think it's going to be endearing to young men when the guy they look up to goes, I don't know, I just put beef and cheese on a tortilla. And just pretending like he's inept and unaccomplished.
I think the things, too, that young men are drawn to are the same things that people in the Democrat Party would call toxic masculinity. For example, Andrew Tate does hit on a lot of things that men are drawn to. That doesn't mean I agree with everything he says, but he does hit on a lot of things that young men are drawn to. Fighting. He was a fighter. Beautiful women. He has a lot of beautiful women around. Cars, fast car. These are very simple things, but these are things that these people would call you're a capitalist pig because you want because you want a Bugatti. You're a misogynist because you like hot women. So these are things that liberals and Democrats would judge men for, but are things that young men are drawn to. And Trump's unabashedly embracing these things. His wife is a former model. He likes going to the UFC. He plays golf on YouTube with these YouTubers. So
I very much take your point about wanting greatness. I also think they just want discipline in a lot of senses.
Yeah.
And this was one of the things that came up when I was, writing about radical Islam in England. Why were so many young people converting to Islam? White young people, especially converting to Islam. And that's because, the Christian church had abandoned this idea of, here is what it is to be a Christian. Here is what it means to be a Christian. These are the value tenets we believe in. It became just like rainbow flags hanging from every church in England. And it is what you make of it. It's whatever you want your truth to be, man. And so young men started gravitating towards Islam. And now you have this really weird situation where you have somebody that was raised in Islam, me, in the West, a brown guy, telling them like, no, dude, that isn't actually the way to go.
Is that happening in numbers?
It certainly was about 10 years ago. I don't know if the trajectory continued.
It was a huge deal. YouTube actually invited me to a special event they were having because they were concerned that this is really fascinating. They didn't know how to handle free speech and radicalization at the same time. And so what they were, and not that they're like really great with free speech, don't get me wrong, but they were basically, the general idea was there are people who produce pro-ISIS videos without saying ISIS or anything. They're pro-jihad Islamic videos. They're targeting young men and they're presenting themselves as reasonable warriors of peace, to be great. And then they're convincing people to move to like Turkey and then move down to Syria, where they radicalize them into joining ISIS. And YouTube was like, these things don't break the rules, but we know what they're doing. Mm-hmm. How do we stop that? And that was the question they're trying to ask. You can't just ban a guy who says, my religion is good and here's where you can hang out with me, but they know exactly what's leading to. And one of the main points was that they told us, is that young men were finding a mission in life. They were finding passion. They were finding something to be a part of. And they didn't know how to counter that. But I do want to sidestep and then throw Bill Kristol into the mix because this one makes me laugh. He says, distressing, depressing, alarming. After everything, after January 6th, after clear evidence, a second term would be far more authoritarian than the first. After the ever-increasing radicalization of MAGA world, Trump now has more support than he had in 2016 or 2020.
This neocon focus on January 6th makes me embarrassed to call myself one. So this whole stuff with Dick Cheney saying he'll vote for Kamala
that must
Harris.
have been rough for you.
Well, Liz Cheney has staked her entire identity now on this January 6th being the worst thing to happen since 9/11. Thank God Bush hasn't endorsed Kamala Harris as well. So
or an Adam Kinzinger who was like, I'm here at the DNC.
Elad, at the next meeting, you just got to make sure to say, guys, tone down the January 6th, tone up the invade Iran.
Come on. Like, what is going on anymore? I don't know if I could call. Well, Bush hasn't endorsed, so.
Dick Cheney, I love this. Someone tweeted, Green Day made a whole album criticizing the Bush administration's government, and now they're aligned with it as Dick Cheney's voting for Kamala Harris. And all the Democrats are like, yay, we've convinced Dick Cheney. I think that says more about the Democratic Party than it does about Dick Cheney.
It was a crazy thing for Kamala Harris not to outwardly reject that endorsement, too. I feel like that should have been an easy thing. Because even Bernie Sanders...
Did you see the interview of her in that coffee shop?
Super
like a reporter
awkward.
yelled at her. First off, I understand completely why she never does interviews. And she's like, oh, well, I'm so grateful because they are both great leaders. And like looking down at her hands. Like she could have not... This is the one question I expected her not to answer. Instead,
What was
she's
the
like...
question?
They asked her, like, are you grateful that you have, Dick Cheney and Liz Cheney's endorsement? And she sort of stumbled her way through, which could have just been like, oh, yes, of course.
I will say...
There is a non-zero chance she just heard Dick and got all giddy. So, I mean...
I will say there is not consensus among neocons on the Kamala Harris question. Nikki Haley still said she will vote for Donald Trump.
Right.
John Bolton obviously served as
We'll see.
National Security
We'll see.
Advisor in the previous term. I'm sure we'll probably see Mike Pompeo again, so...
Right.
By the way, this comes back to an earlier point. This is low testosterone. That's what's happened to these old men.
Yeah, well, explain.
Well, look, I mean, everything is pathos here. It's crybaby stuff.
Right.
Oh, it's January 6th. And oh, it's all an appeal to emotion. They're taking logic, they're taking the ethos out of the equation entirely. Because for somebody like Bill Kristol especially, who spent his entire life advocating for Israel and peace in the Middle East, right? President Trump was the president of the Abraham Accords, right? He was the president of very few jihadi attacks. Hamas was not trying to make incursions into Israel under Trump. Everybody was terrified what this crazy man at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue might do, just might do. If there's an off chance that he might take some retaliatory action, then we don't want to go there. And these, people like Bill Kristol are the ones that really shock me, because actually what they're saying is they never gave a flying fuck about these principles that they profess to have.
Well, allegedly, Bill Kristol cares about democracy, right? So I think that's why he's hopping on this January 6th to, in their minds, that's registering with people as I care about democracy because I'm complaining about January 6th.
I think the only thing they ever cared about was the petrodollar. And the reason why the neocons have jumped ship to join the Democrats is because, I'll just dramatically oversimplify. Trump and MAGA represents restore America. Literally, make America great again. Secure our borders, focus on this country. Democrats represent, we want to strip everything down to the bare bones. We want to rip the copper from the walls to do whatever we have to do to maintain the international IMF petrodollar infrastructure. So they're going to burn the economy to the ground in the United States, flood the country with illegal immigrants because they're desperate to keep job numbers up and to pad the economy, while they fund the war in Ukraine to push back Russia, while they provide funding to Israel and many other countries, not just those two, but those are the big ones that everyone's talking about. Taiwan, of course. Elad gets mad because I don't mention Taiwan.
National security hawks, too, are most concerned about Trump's rhetoric around leaving NATO, although I think that's just a rhetorical tool to get them to increase their GDP to military funding.
But
Democrats don't even try that.
The neocons have joined the Democrats because they're like, look, the only thing that matters is that we blow up anybody who dare oppose the petrodollar. And this is a strong basis for what we see with Russia and Ukraine. It's a strong basis for obviously what's going on in the Middle East. The United States wants to expand the liberal economic order. They're failing at it. They failed at it. When Trump won in 2016, it proved the liberal economic order had failed already. They tried to get rid of Trump. They couldn't do it. When you look at the crosstabs in that New York Times poll and see that the largest demographic for identifying as Democrat is 65 plus in the age groups. It literally is the liberal economic order worldview of the 1950s, and it is over. When the next generation moves in, you see Gen Z is not Democrat. They're independent. But people on the right need to understand those young people are leftists. They hate Israel. This shift, this country is going to be so different in 10 years. When the 65 plus crowd are reaching their, they're moving on. I'm not trying to be crass or crude or disrespectful, but when they move on, those votes will be gone with them. And there will be a tremendous amount of impact on the younger generation moving in to the age where they start taking the controls of industry and politics. And the worldview there is dramatically different.
Do you believe the old Churchillian mantra, a liberal at 20, a conservative at 30? No?
Not anymore.
No, but I don't think that was ever really... That's all. They say if you're not a liberal when you're young, you have no heart. If you're not a conservative when you're old, you have no head. And I don't think it's necessarily true. What's actually happening is that society itself was pushing leftist worldview on young people intentionally through, it was constructed. It was on purpose. Well, I would put it this way. I would say it's half emergent, half on purpose. So what happens now is you reach the limit of what leftism can bring you, which is these weird books in schools, racist policies that make everything worse, like Robin DiAngelo's stuff. And eventually people start rejecting it. So what's happening is, let's take a look at where we're at now, right? A liberal, Donald Trump was a liberal in the 90s. He's a New York Democrat or a New York conservative, what do you want to call him, which is meaning he's like a moderate left-leaning guy. Now he's the far right. He represents all of the furthest right things. He's in favor of limited abortion. Donald Trump's position on abortion is like old school, slightly right-leaning Democrat. He's like, well, it should, the states should decide. And of course, Democrats were in favor of Roe v. Wade, but Trump is like, I'm not going to ban it nationally. Maybe we'll find out a certain amount of weeks is good. He is not the staunch far right guy. The system moves not because you get older and become conservative, but because people with a worldview keep that worldview with them. And historically, the younger people have been indoctrinated with further left views until today for two reasons. Internet has changed how culture is being disseminated. More importantly, liberals stopped having kids. I don't mean that absolutely. Liberals, of course, have kids, but they're aborting and sterilizing them. In the 2000s, there's a report people like to bring up about replacement migration that was published by the UN. And the issue was that fertility was too low. Fertility is supposed to be 3 for economic expansion. And then in the 2000s, it was like 2.04 or something, or I might have been like 1.9. And so they're like, what do we do when we don't have enough workers anymore? Mass migration. So this is now, there's more conservatives being born and being raised by conservatives with leftist indoctrination. I get it. But this is why the whole thing is starting to skew and shift in this way. It's why the Democratic Party is on the way out. And it's why I think the establishment, the deep state, all of these things, they are fizzling out of control. They're becoming desperate and dangerous. But in 20 years, they probably will not exist. They might exist in some small remnant form that is mocked and ridiculed. But you can see since 2016, let me put it this way. I think it was Brett Weinstein who was talking to, it was Eric Weinstein, the magician's choice presidency, where it's supposed to be Barack Obama versus McCain. 2 people who represent largely the same things with a minor difference in cultural issues. So that the people feel like they're winning, their team is getting it. But for the most part, we kind of don't care because we all agree. Donald Trump comes around and says, it's time to restore America. They called him a Pied Piper candidate. They thought he couldn't win. The moment Trump won was when the crack in the armor of the deep state was visible, and they panicked. And they tried to impeach Trump. They accused him of being a Russian spy and all of this nonsense, the phony Alpha Bank story. None of it worked. They've only gotten weaker as time has gone on. That being said, they've gotten more desperate. Now they're trying to criminally charge him, put him in jail, but that's not working. None of it's working. Bill Kristol exemplifies it perfectly when he says, how is Trump more popular? You, sir, are a figurative dinosaur. You represent an old worldview that has faded out of the controlling infrastructure of this country. You have joined the Democrats for this reason, and the worldview of the next generation is massively different. They didn't see it coming. It changed. It didn't become more liberal. It became more populist. And now, when these people, the boomers were all in their late 60s, they're getting close to their late 70s in the next 10, 20 years, they will not be a part of politics anymore. I don't know exactly what it will look like, but this modern iteration of the deep state will not function when that worldview is gone.
You have to wonder if he has any self-reflection at the end there. He says Trump now has more support than he had in 2016 or in 2020. Why? I wonder if he ever asks himself why that is, because he recognizes that is the case, and Trump has been only becoming more popular the more time he spent in politics. But
right. If you feared it, you would want to know why. But instead, he's actually, and I sort of agree with maybe the low T analysis here, he has moved into a more emotional stance rather than being critical, analyzing, wanting, even if you don't like Trump, you have to know why people are interested in him. Instead, it's just actual panic, which is sort of less inspiring in my opinion.
Actually, sadness is what it is. He's sad. He's a sad man, and he's feeling sadness, and he wants to tweet about his sadness.
Well,
that's sad.
I know the
Very
feeling.
emo.
I know the feeling, Bill. I imagine it's how rollerbladers felt at the end of the 90s. Rollerblading, there were 32 million people rollerblading. It's what launched the X Games. And then by the 2000s, people were slowly not rollerblading anymore. And now, for those that are still pros, they have very small followings. They don't make any money anymore. The industry is gone. So these people must be looking back on the glory days. I remember when you'd go to the park and there were 1,000 kids all cheering and watching you rollerblade, and now it's not there anymore.
I feel the same about trebuchet operating. Once upon a time, there were huge armies dedicated to rolling the trebuchet down the hill.
Times have changed.
They've changed. Yeah.
Times change, And so a lot of people are sad about this. Jack Posobiec talks about Pizza Hut.
Yeah.
We used to go to Pizza Hut.
Yeah.
And you'd have the salad bar and you'd be with your family. I remember those days. It genuinely makes me sad those days are gone.
Every so often I crave Pizza Hut pizza.
But they ruined it now.
Horrifying.
It's got Splenda in the crust.
Yeah.
Look,
I never went through that. It was
So this is
Blockbuster.
Coast of America
it was
over here.
Blockbuster.
This is the point.
That was the nostalgia.
Bill
thing.
Kristol laments the loss of this era where we could just easily go bomb anybody we want in the United States. Well, now the American people don't want that. Thanks for checking out this clip from Timcast IRL. Make sure to watch the show live Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. Subscribe to this channel, and we will see you all there.